everybody. We're out on site this evening. I hope you're all okay. Welcome to this impromptu sort of live stream. So apologies if the live stream doesn't work out right well. Again, this is just a tryout. It's just to try some things out with this, and hope you're all well. Leave your comments. Yes, you can see that there are buses in the background and what have you. You can see. Don't worry, I'm in a safe quarantined area. Before anyone asks, where's my high vis? My high vis is just about here. See, I have got my high vis, okay, but I am in a quarantined area, so we're okay. So before anyone asks, I've got my high vis. Okay, so without further ado, let's run this because I haven't got a lot of time, and I'm worried about whether this live stream lasts or not, because you know, normally they don't normally last this well once we start running and stuff. So welcome along, everybody. Please leave your comments so I can see that this is actually live and that we're actually working and that you can actually see me or not, as the case may be. Or you may not be able to hear me. That's another thing that you might be able to hear. There might be some background or anything and what have you. So without further ado, let's crack on. And I've already messed up because I've got all the way from the start to the end. Here we go. So we've got our question and answer session. So first of all, which connectors are waterproof? That's question number one. And then what is the normal shrink rate of standard heat shrink? And then what size cable will fit a standard blue terminal? And then what we're going to look at then is, this is all our introductions. Yes, I know I need to buy a shaver. Let's just go back to this, shall we? So we're already getting the jib, aren't we? There we go. Buy a razor, Jace. Thanks, mate. Thanks very much. Yes, I have got a razor, but there we go. And Alex, yes, I can see you. Great. Thanks very much. And Joel, welcome on. Hello there. How are we doing? Okay. So we'll crack on with this presentation. So first of all, connectors. We've got standard connectors. We've got heat shrink. We've got another little addition here called step downs. So I thought I'd show you those. And then we're going to talk about some heat shrink solder. And then we'll talk about solder and heat shrink, and we'll do a quick question and answer session at the end. So connectors, very important thing here to mention here about connector gauge and the gauge cable and the size of gauge versus the connector. 0.5 millimeter gauge cable to 1.5 millimeter is for red. So this is, you know, standard sort of tracker cable, I would say, telematics. And then you've got 1.5 millimeters to 2.5 millimeters. That should be blue connectors. And then we've got 4 millimeter squared to 6 millimeter squared. That is for your yellow connectors. See this quite a lot, even going out on audits nowadays, is that where you get a blue crimp being used on red gauge cable, on lower gauge cable. Not good, but you know, I hear the thing of, well, we can double it over and then that's fine because then you're doubling up the gauge. Well, still really not acceptable. You know, that's why bother having red gauge, why bother having red connectors then if that's the case? So yeah. So we move on to the types of connectors you can use. Standard connectors, well, yeah, there's the standard connections. They are cheap. They're the most cost-effective way of doing it. The problem is they're not waterproof. And beware of, all I will say is beware of cheap imitations. You can get cheaper versions of this, and they don't hold. They don't crimp well, or anything. You know, not really a good thing to use. But the key thing with any of these connectors is use the right tool, use the correct tooling, use a ratchet crimp, make sure it's fully adjusted and everything before you crimp and everything. So we then move on to heat shrink connectors. Now this is quite cool because these are some of the connectors now that we're starting to see accepted by the motor manufacturers. They can be waterproof if done correctly. Again, beware of cheap imitations. You can get ones there that don't shrink right, and they make a mess. Basically, they just go brittle, which they shouldn't really go brittle enough that they go like rock hard that you can't move them. And again, same thing, use the correct tooling, but bear in mind that there is a ratchet crimp tool for heat shrink, and you shouldn't really be using the same crimp tool or the same ratchet crimp tool as the you should use like the ratchet crimp tool for heat shrink. Sorry, get my words out in a minute. So here's a little addition to the family of heat shrinks, which is the step-ups. These are quite good for adding cables for a splice connection and what have you. So yeah, they're quite good. And then we've got heat shrink solder connections. Well, if used correctly, these are great. They can be waterproof as well, but you need the proper heat shrink tool to do this. You can't just use it with a blowtorch or anything. It needs to be one with a catalyst, so that the heat's regulated, because if you don't use the right type of heat gun, it just melts it away, or the solder just melts away, or the salt doesn't get hot enough. So yeah, temperature is a very key thing for that one. And then we talk about heat shrink. Well, heat shrink, yes, it has a, we've talked about solder before and using solder with heat shrink and what have you, but beware of the imitations. With this one, cheap imitations, better to have a good rate of shrink rate. The higher the shrink rate, the better the heat shrink will wrap around the connection. And you can get the adhesive line heat shrink. Well, the adhesive lined heat shrink is waterproof, but beware, it is brittle. So, which connectors are waterproof? Well, where's your answers? Where's the answers to those? Well, it is the most waterproof one is the adhesive line heat shrink. The others can be, they can be waterproof to a point, or water resistant. I would say that they the water resistance is basically with adhesive line heat shrink. And then what is the normal shrink rate of standard heat shrink? It's actually 3 to 1. Standard heat shrink, which you buy normally, but there are better versions out there. And then what cable size will fit a standard blue terminal? And it's 1.5 mil to 2.5 millimeters, or up to 3 millimeters, should we say. Okay, guys, any questions and answers there? If we haven't, don't worry. I will leave it on for a second or a little bit longer. No, nothing. Any more bleeping? Can't see any. It's the only problem when you've got when you do this restream. There's a bit of a delay, and I normally have to wait. Doesn't look like there's any questions. So, thanks very much for watching tonight, folks. Next week, we are talking about cable securing and cable protection. So, thanks for watching, and I will see you all next week.